KIRO, Seattle.
This is COVID-19 Seattle. I'm Dave Ross.
And I'm Aaron Granillo. Well, the pressure keeps mounting on Governor Jay Inslee to lift parts of his stay-home order. Some Republican leaders around the state are now making the case these rules are unconstitutional, while others say Inslee is not offering enough specifics on what's guiding his policy. Here's Republican House Leader J.T. Wilcox.
What is happening, I think, very rapidly is he is losing the willingness of the people that live in Washington to comply, because there are so many things that are plainly unfair and also a lot of things that don't seem like they make sense in terms of safety.
Inslee is staying the course, says his decisions are based on data and science. But, Dave, it's becoming clear here. His opponents want more details.
I'm curious whether there has been any polling done on this. I know there's nationwide polling showing that a majority of Americans are willing to stay at home if it means preventing the spread of the virus. But I guess we have to assess whether people here in Washington feel the same way. And on the fairness or unfairness, the other unanswered question is, how easily can you get an exception by going to the state's website where companies can argue that they are, in fact, an essential business? It's fair to say the construction industry is the one that's the most confused about this, because public construction projects are going, whereas private construction projects have been stopped. These are human beings working on both kinds of projects, and so you would think there were equal chances of becoming infected. It was interesting to talk to Chris Sullivan today about Boeing, which is now reopened the Everett factory, I believe it is. And it is the workers themselves who are having to decide whether they feel safe enough based on the equipment and the protective gear that Boeing is issuing for them to go to work.
Some of them are saying, well, it's certainly obvious that Boeing has made some changes. We see a lot more, thousands of gallons worth of hand sanitizer. It seems like they got all the masks, the PPE, they've got all that stuff they need. But what I am hearing certainly is that social distancing is still very difficult. When you're in those, in a fuselage working in your teams of 8 or so, it's really hard to socially distance there, and that there are some groups of people that are not, wearing the PPE or wearing the masks or wearing the goggles, because wearing the extra equipment, I've heard certainly from workers say that it's very difficult.
Sure.
They fog up and it's not very comfortable. And so after a while, some of them just say, I'm blowing it off.
So I guess given the incubation period, we won't know for, another couple of weeks?
Yeah, 10 to 12, 14 days, depending on how things went. So, and it's not a full capacity either. I mean, some people still don't feel comfortable going back to work. A couple people have said that they went back when they were supposed to, then kind of saw what they were seeing, like, maybe I won't go back yet. And they're using some unpaid time off to maybe hold out for another week or so. So kind of a mixed bag, and certainly a test case for our first major national manufacturer of this scale to kind of go back and test the waters.
Well, it sounds like Franklin County wants to make that experiment a reality. It signed this order this week defying the governor's order, saying businesses can reopen there. Inslee did fire back yesterday. He sent a letter to those commissioners.
And I made clear that those actions really intentionally and knowingly violated the state law, and so they'll have to change. We really cannot equivocate on this point. And we cannot have individual law enforcement officers arbitrarily decide which laws they're going to enforce and which laws they're not going to enforce.
So that last statement there was clearly a shot at Snohomish County Sheriff Adam Fortney. He said his department would not enforce the order. And then you hear from the Snohomish County prosecuting attorney, Adam Cornell, saying he fears that comments like that will give people a license to blatantly violate the law.
Well, that's always dangerous. I mean, the sheriff has to understand that if people see him doing that, then there are plenty of people who disagree with some things that the sheriff does. They might say, well, as long as we can all choose which laws to obey, then that applies to what you tell us to do too, Sheriff Fortney. So I think that's generally a bad idea. I don't think the governor is deliberately trying to harm people. It doesn't make any sense. I will, if I can venture into politics for a moment, there are plenty of people who see Jay Inslee as another Democrat who all he lives for is for additional state revenue. If he was doing that, he'd open the whole thing immediately, right? Because the state's not getting any sales tax revenue now to speak of. They have a surplus in the budget now, but it's dwindling rapidly. So I think the governor also wants to reopen it. What he has to do is convince people that there's some consistency there, that it's not just being done arbitrarily. I'm guessing. I mean, if you were to try to assess each individual business and whether its activities are safe or unsafe, that would require a whole new bureaucracy of state employees because there are so many businesses operating under so many different conditions. But I think it probably makes sense to at least start with the construction industry, since some workers are allowed to be in that business and others for some reason are not.
Right, and there could be some good news on the construction, by the way. Inslee says if the models hold up today, as early as today, he could roll back some of those restrictions for construction. Also, some outdoor recreational activities like fishing could be allowed. Also, elective surgeries could be allowed yet again as well. And I also just want to say, let's not forget that the federal standards that the Trump administration has rolled out, they say there needs to be 14 consecutive days of falling infection numbers before restrictions are eased. And we have not yet met that metric.
Now, when you say falling infection numbers, that's another question I had. Mm-hmm. Based on what? Because as far as I know, we're still only testing people who exhibit symptoms.
Correct.
And infections may not necessarily lead to symptoms. So it seems to me you're not going to get reliable, quote, infection numbers until there's general testing, right?
It all comes back to testing, doesn't it?
I'm afraid it does.
Today, the state Supreme Court hears a case requesting about 12,000 prison inmates be released to protect them from COVID-19. Columbia Legal Services filed this lawsuit. They want the justices to order the release of any inmates over 50 years old, those with underlying health issues, and those with 18 months or less on their sentence. Victims are horrified by this.
He already ruined our lives. He already took away my best friend, and my mom. She was my best friend, and my kids' grandmother. Like we're the victims, and it feels like he has more rights than we do.
So that's Tanya Fenton, and she spoke with our sister station, KTTH, says her mom's killer would go free if the court rules in favor of this plan. Now, Dave, the governor already agreed to release upwards of 1,000 non-violent criminals. Does this lawsuit go too far?
Oh, yes. I could not believe that when I heard that this morning. I thought that Hannah was kidding. Obviously, she's not. The thing to do for a prisoner over 50 who is a Gary Ridgway, when I heard Gary Ridgway was going to be released, that was another thing that I could not believe. Provide them with protective equipment. There's got to be a way to get it. There are plenty of prisoners who could be put to work making it. But the idea that you would allow people who have been convicted of murder, aggravated murder, serial killings are going to be simply released from prison, without any meaningful supervision, it might be wise, I suppose, to prepare a secure facility somewhere where there's possibly more spacing available. But I think release is a non-starter. I couldn't imagine any judge ordering this, and if he did, it would have to be immediately stayed pending some sort of orderly way to do it, especially considering that judges in the state are elected. I can't think of anything that would end a judge's career sooner than to approve the release of someone like Gary Ridgway. Okay,
so here's the Columbia Legal Services argument, though. They're saying that if we are to respond to this global pandemic, we must ensure that everyone is protected from exposure to COVID-19. That includes incarcerated people. There are concerns in these prison systems because there are now clusters of cases that have popped up, in particular at the Monroe Correctional Complex, where there was that big demonstration a couple of weeks ago. If we could have already, kept inmates safe, we wouldn't see these clusters, right? I mean, that's sort of their argument.
Well, it is, and I still don't understand why everyone who is in a confined space is not wearing a mask. And in prison, where you can control the conduct of the inmates, that should be required right now. I would think that if the answer is going to be release, how does that actually keep anybody safe? Yeah, I could argue that given that we don't have any mask policy on the outside, that could potentially be even more of a problem. But there's just no getting beyond the idea that if you're going to release Gary Ridgway into the general population for whatever reason, okay, I don't care if, forest fire, nuclear war, that's just a non-starter with most people.
Yeah, he's one of 12,000 people who could be released if this case is approved by the Supreme Court. Statewide, we have about 19,000 prisoners, so that's 2/3, give or take, a little more.
Yeah,
than
it's a real threat, but it's also something to consider before you decide to break the law, right? You don't go to Walla Walla unless you did something really, really bad.
I mean, they're just saying if you're over 50, if you have a health issue and you have 18 months or less, and you're set free.
There'd have to be some evaluation of the public threat there, besides just an age requirement. That doesn't make any sense to me.
We will be back tomorrow and every day after with a 10-minute rundown of the daily local news. You can subscribe to this podcast. You can also find our news coverage on mynorthwest.com or listen live at 97.3 FM.